Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel, and in this video you're going to learn how to add charts to your HTMX and Go web application. And we'll also be using a bit of JavaScript, using a JavaScript framework to be able to render these charts. Now the reality is that when it comes to this type of things, when it comes to JavaScript interactivity in the front end, we always will need to add a bit of JavaScript to our web applications when working with HTMX. And I keep saying this over and over again in my videos, and that's because it is true. When using HTMX, we are not trying to run away from JavaScript, but in fact integrate with the browser APIs in a better way than we would if we were using something like React, Svelte, or Vue, which tries to abstract everything away and not always have good ergonomics when it comes to interacting with the JavaScript browser APIs. So with this being said, by the end of the video, we're going to have both of these cards that display the new users and the new activations inside our web application. And we'll also have the ability to refresh the charts so that it updates with the new data that is coming from the backend. With this being said, let's hop into the code and see how we can pull this off. To give you a bit of context about how the metrics that we retrieve from the database are actually being sent to the template later when we actually get to that part, we have here this data.go file with the logic that is going to allow us to interact with a metrics table that has three different columns. It is going to have, first of all, the metrics date. So we want to essentially have a date that we want to track, and then we'll have the new users and the new activation. And this table is going to sort of mimic the way things are done when a database table is normalized. So you can think of this as, for example, creating a bunch of different users or activating a bunch of different users. And let's say every 6 hours we would want to update this table with the new number, so that instead of refetching or recomputing this value over and over again, we would simply go to the database and ask it for all of the new users and the new activations for a particular date. And then we have here a couple of helper functions to be able to initialize the new users metrics and also the new activation metrics. Then we have this metrics dates function that is going to help us with creating the labels from a particular date to be able to send those to templ. And we also have these functions here that are going to allow us to interact with a database. Now, the focus here of this video is not really to show you how to do these things. We can go over this in a different video, but this is just to give you a bit of context as to how we are actually fetching this information from the backend. So the first thing that we want to now focus on to be able to create our charts is going to be the handler that is going to allow us to, first of all, display the charts on the initial render and then also do the refreshing of those charts. At the moment, we already have this dashboard handler inside our handler.go file, and it is essentially going to initialize the metrics here, and then it is going to grab the metrics from this function that we took a look at earlier. And then after doing this, it is going to render first here the dashboard, or it is actually going to grab the dashboard template, and after doing that, it is going to render it with the request context and the response writer. And here we pass as an argument, as you can see, the metrics that we grab from here. This is a slice of data.metric. And then when we pass this into the dashboard template, we'll have access to this here. Now, again, we still don't have these templates implemented, but when we get to that part, we are going to have here our chart cards that are going to allow us to pass this information into those charts. So this is everything that we'll be needing to be able to do the initial rendering of our page and show the charts right away. And now let's focus on a new handler that we want to add here that will allow us to refresh those charts. The handler name will be refresh chart handler, and it will take as arguments, the response writer, and the pointer to the request. And then we want to start by extracting the ID from the URL path. So we are going to essentially be making a request from the browser to this endpoint, and we are going to have something like /refresh chart, and then / the ID that we want to refresh. And the ID will be either new users or new activation. So we want to initialize here a column that we'll be using in just a second. And then if the ID equals new dash users, we want the column to be new underscore users. This is the column that we want to look for when doing our request to the backend. And then if it is new dash activations, we say that the column will be new underscore activations. Next, we'll initialize a new slice of data.metric, and after doing this, we'll be using the getMetric function. We need to pass as an argument, first of all, the context, then we will pass here the connection to the database, and after doing this, we want to pass the column that we are interested in, again, either the new users or the new activations column. And after doing this, we need to pass a reference to the slice of data.metric to be able to modify the original result. This is going to mutate this variable here with the data that we get from the database. After doing this, we will be returning here this error, and if the error is different than nil, we want to keep this simple and print the error to the console and stop the request from running by returning this here. And finally, we want to render the chart component based on the ID that we want to replace inside the DOM. So if the ID is new-users, then we'll be calling the chart template, which is going to return a component, and then we want to render this down here. And we want to pass 4 different arguments. First, the ID, then we want to pass the metrics dates, and this function again is going to take care of this. It is going to parse this date, and then it is going to format it in the following way so that we have nice labels being displayed inside the web application. And then we will be calling either the new users metrics function or the new activations metrics function if the ID is new-activations. And if we take a look at both of these functions, they are pretty similar, but in this case we want to append here only the metric.newUsers to the slice of ints, and in this case we want to do the exact same thing, but use here the new activations, which means that we are going to pass the data into this chart based on the ID that we receive. So if we either want to refresh all of the new users or only the new activations chart. But before we continue, if you want to learn more about how to build web applications with HTMX, Go, and PostgreSQL, then go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below. Now let's take care of the templates, and we want to start by first of all taking a look at the chart card template, and later we'll move to the JavaScript part of things on how to install Chart.js, which is the package that we'll be using, and also how to use it to do here the integration with this component. So we have the name here of the temple component, which is chart card, and then we'll pass as arguments first the ID, which is going to be either new users or new activations. Then we also want to pass a title to show to the user or to show inside our web application. And then we want to pass the labels and the data. Both of these are going to be interfaces or type any. Then we have here a wrapping div. We want to skip over the CSS part. We have here the title that we display to the end user. And then we have this button that will allow us to refresh the chart. A few things to keep in mind here that are important for us to understand is, first of all, we have this hx-disable, which actually should be disabled, ELT. So this means that when a request is being done by this element, we want to disable the element itself, and that's why we add here the this. It means essentially that we want to reference this element itself to be disabled while the request is occurring. Then we want to add an ID. We'll be using the sprintf function, and we want to pass here chart dash refresh dash and then the ID that we have here. Now this is only the ID for the button itself, not the chart. And then we have the method that we want to make the request with, and also the path when we click on this button. The path is going to be / refresh dash chart and then / the ID. Again, keep in mind because we want to have that information inside the backend to know what chart with, or in this case, what data we should send back when we return the HTML partial. Then we want to specify the swapping strategy, which will be outer HTML. So we don't want to replace using HTMX only the inner HTML, but the entire outer element. And then we want to specify the target, which will also be using the sprintf function to be able to add here the ID. And the ID will be chart-card and then dash the ID of the chart that we are working with. Then we have here the classes. Again, we want to skip over this part. We have here this SVG that is essentially that small icon that is going to rotate when the request is occurring. And to accomplish this, we want to add this class here. So we want to say when the HTMX-request class is present inside of a parent element, we want to add here the animate-spin, and when we make a request with this button, it is going to add this HTMX-request class to itself, and since this is a parent element of the SVG, it is going to apply this animate-spin class, and it is going to spin the icon. And now we get to the part of the actual chart itself. So to accomplish this, we'll be using first here the canvas element. So the Chart.js library requires us to use this element, the canvas element, and to also fix a few things when it comes to resizing our windows. We want to add both of these classes here to ensure that when you resize your window, the charts are actually responsive. And then we want to add the ID, and the ID is going to be charts dash and then the ID of the chart that we are working with. Then we have this chart template or component that we want to split from the chart card component because we want to be able to send it back from the browser when we want to refresh our charts. So if you recall, inside the handler, we don't actually call the card component itself or the chart card component, but we want to call only this thing, and then the refresh is going to happen using HTMX and also a bit of JavaScript. This template is going to take also 4 different arguments: the ID, the labels, and the data. And finally, we want to tell it if this is a swap OB operation or not. And inside this template, we have something pretty simple. We have a div element that has no content inside it. And then we have first an ID that is going to be chart-card- the ID that we pass here as an argument. Then we have these data attributes that are going to allow us to extract information about a chart. First, we have this data-ID, and it only contains the ID as we grab it here from the arguments. Then we have this attribute that doesn't have any values. It is only an attribute that says data-chart. And then we have the labels and the data. Both of those will need to be actually JSON stringified, so that we then inside the JavaScript file can parse that JSON and actually pass that information along to Chart.js. First, we have the data-labels, and the value will be templ.json string, and we pass as an argument the labels. So what this will allow us to do is transform these labels into a JSON string with the help of templ. And we do the exact same thing for the data-data. In this case, instead of passing the labels, we pass the data here, and then we have this class of relative. And finally, at the bottom, after adding the chart component here, we want to add the script that is going to have all of the logic to be able to actually show the chart. So now let's take a look at this JavaScript file, but before we continue, if you want to learn more about how to build web applications with HTMX, Go, and PostgreSQL, then go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below. So here at the top, we start with declaring this function that will render a chart, and then we want to pass here the chart and also a target. Then we want to start by grabbing here the closest div element, which can either be the target that is being passed as an argument or the current script previous sibling, meaning the div element that has all of the data attributes that we are interested in. Next, we want to get all of the attributes with the information that we care about when it comes to the chart. So we say here closest div element dot get attribute and then data dash data, and we do the exact same thing for the labels and for the ID. Next, we create a new data object where we have first the labels. We want to JSON parse it by passing here this as an argument, and then we want to pass here the data sets. It is going to be an array, and inside its array we only have one object, and we have these following keys. We have first the data, and we also want to JSON parse the chart data here. Then we want to specify here the background color and also the border radius to make sure that the chart looks nice. The next thing we want to do is we want to check to see if a chart is being passed as an argument, and if that's the case, we simply want to overwrite the labels and the data sets and then update the chart, and if not, we want to initialize a new chart and return it at the end of the function. And now that I actually take a look at this, I think that we can actually move this data from here and place it after we check if a chart already exists, since we'll be using this data here at the bottom, and here we'll be parsing the chart labels and the data directly. So if a chart already exists and it is being passed as an argument, we want to override the chart data labels, and we also want to override the chart data sets. And in this case, we want to add here also only one object inside the array, and we want to reuse the object properties that we had previously set up when it comes to the styling. To accomplish this, we say here chart.data.datasets, and we grab the first one, and we spread the properties of this object, and then we override only the data attribute with the JSON parse, and we pass here as an argument the chart data. And finally, we want to update the chart by using this function that the Chart.js library provides us with, and we then return to ensure the function doesn't continue running. But if we don't have a chart yet, then we want to add here the data. We already took a look at this previously, and then we want to initialize a new chart. So we say here chart equals new chart, and then we pass here the element by ID. So we want to look for the chart by the ID, and to accomplish this, we say here chart dash, and then we pass the ID that we extract from the div attributes that we've extracted at the start of this function. And then we pass all of the options that we want Chart.js to use when we initialize this chart. I'm going to skip over most of these things since I don't really think it is a good use of our time here, but we want to say that the type is bar, and then we want to pass the data. And then we have here a couple of options. We want to not display the legend, for example. We want to add here a bunch of different stuff when it comes to the tooltips, when it comes to the styling of the tooltips, and also we want to show this label that says the values and then new users. So if we either have all of the new users or the new activated users, and then we also want to add here a few things when it comes to showing the Y and the X axis. So we want to sort of modify here the behavior of the Chart.js library. And all of these things are going to be mostly related to the styling of this package itself. The most important things here are to say that this is of type bar and then pass the data here. And finally, after we initialize the chart, we want to return it down here along with the chart ID that we extract from the div element. And then after we create this function, after we specify what this function is, we want to actually call it inside of this block. So we want to say here render chart, and this is going to return the chart and the chart ID that we return from here. And we pass no arguments into this function. So when we initially render a chart, we don't want to pass any kind of arguments because we are not yet updating the chart, but we are going to do the initial rendering of it. And then after doing this, we want to add a new event listener, and we want to listen for the HTMX after settled event. We want to ensure that this is listening on the document body, and each time this event gets triggered, then we want to invoke this function. We take here as an argument the event, and then we want to do the following things. We want to check and see if the target ID is the ID of the chart that we are working with. So we do here this comparison. We say event.detail.target.id equals the chart-card-chart ID that we extract from the div element. And if both of these match, then we want to invoke the render chart function. We are going to call this function, and we'll pass as arguments first the chart that we already have available to us, and the second argument is going to be the element that was sent from the backend along with the new attributes that has all of the new data and labels. Next, we want to install Chart.js. First, we want to source this chart.min.js file, and then we want to download this file from the Chart.js CDN and include it inside of our static directory. So let's navigate here to this other pane, and here I'll be using the wget command, and then we want to specify this entire path from the Chart.js CDN. And one thing that is important here is that instead of require the chart.min.js file, we want to require the chart.umd.js file. And then we'll specify here where we want to output this file to after we download it, and we specify here the static directory, and then we say chart.min.js. And this, along with including the script tag inside the dashboard template, means that we now have access to the Chart.js library inside our JavaScript files. Finally, we want to add a new route with the refresh chart path and also handler. So we're going to paste this here. We'll be using the get method. We need to specify here the refresh dash chart path and then the ID that we'll be able to extract using the shear router, and then we specify here the handler. Finally, we want to add here the chart cards for both the new users and the new activation so that it displays before the feed component. So inside the dashboard template, we want to paste the following code, and we want to first ensure that we wrap both the charts around this div that is going to have the classes of grid and then 2 columns, and we also want to add here some gap and a margin at the top. And after doing this, we want to pass here the chart card twice. First, we want to specify the ID being new users. Then we want the label to be new users. And after doing this, we'll be calling here data.matrix_dates. We pass the metrics that we have available to us. And then we say here data.newUsersMetrics. And we also pass here the metrics for the new users. And we do the exact same thing for the new activations. We pass first the ID, then the label, then we want to pass here the dates. This is going to be the exact same thing as here. And finally, we want to grab the activation metrics by calling the function from the data package, and we pass here the metrics as an argument. Now, if we move back to the browser, we finally see here the charts with the new users and the new activations. And for example, if we take a look at this bar, it says here that the number is 618 new users. And if we try to reseed here our database and then click here on this button, it is going to repopulate the chart with a new set of numbers. So we now have here a different number inside of this chart. meaning that we have the ability to hit the backend and then refresh the chart with a new set of data. As you can see,